We are speaking today with John Henry Scherck, owner of Growth Plays, which is an SEO and strategy consultancy based out of LA, with a really niche focus on B2B SaaS companies with stable funding, big valuations. John Henry is a master at what he does for his clients. And at Outshine, we really love the kind of critical lens that he takes when assessing and analyzing everything from his client's website performance to trendy takes in the B2B SaaS world. He's, super refreshingly honest and authentic, but also brilliant and very unbiased. So we're super happy to be speaking with him today to learn just a little bit more about the world in which he operates. So, Growth Plays. This is a good name, really strong, really simple. Do you have like a go-to growth play or a go-to growth strategy when it comes to, SEO success in B2B?
Wow. So go-to play, I mean, I think first thing I really look at, and by the way, thank you for the introduction. That was way better than I could have done myself. Um, so honestly, first thing I really look at is trying to take just a totally fresh approach to looking at the website and just saying, what are they asking me to do here? And I think as companies get bigger, and I mean like late stage, like not Series A, but once you are a few thousand employees, the website kind of becomes this thing where it's designed by committee. And there's a lot of different competing interests. And at the end of the day, like the goal of the website, or it should be the goal of the website, is pipeline generation. And I think when you start, showcasing your upcoming events or having calls to action about, look at our new ebook, our new webinar, those things can be helpful, but they should be secondary. Like the primary motivator on the website, the primary call to action should always be speaking with sales, booking a meeting, getting into the product. And I think as companies grow and they develop like bigger brands, they kind of get away from some of that pipeline generation because, well, there's just a lot of competing interests, and brand oftentimes wins out on performance marketing as a company grows. But if you look at like best in class, highest performing companies like Salesforce, that website is designed to get you into a sales cycle. And I think companies get distracted as they have more and more marketing activities that go on. So really just dialing in and asking, what do we want people to do here? Like the homepage is almost always the most traffic page on a website. Sometimes you can have some like SEO articles that are very top of funnel that outperform it. But when it comes to people who are actually like trying to learn about the company, trying to learn about the products, that's usually the homepage. So making that as simple and as easy to either get into the product or engage in a sales cycle or speak to a representative on live chat, that's typically what I like to optimize for, because if the website itself isn't harvesting that buyer intent, then all the SEO traffic in the world isn't going to matter.
I think you posted a tweet recently, maybe like sometime last month, that included this screenshot of like surging organic traffic for a client of yours. And I think it was over the past 2 years or so. And I think you credited the success to a few different things: close collaboration with content, web ops, and demand gen. And I think you made mention of no backlinking as well.
Mhm.
Can you talk a bit about like this client case study and how you collaborated with those different teams to get those results?
Yeah. So this is actually a shared customer. I can go into that after the call.
Okay.
But yeah, I'd say with that company, they really knew their product well. And so it became about mapping the content strategy to the different functions and pain points the product solves for. So we learned and sort of mapped out every single aspect of their product, got a few demos, and started talking to people about like what does this feature do, and what's its real use case, and how does it help people, not just like what is it called, but like what's it solving for. And then we basically were able to attach those functions or those pain points to different keywords, and then put together a multi-stage content strategy that started kind of at the bottom of the funnel, honestly, and then moved up to more like product functionality, use cases, pain points that it solves for. And the team is just laser focused on building like a best in class publication for their industry to read and share and kind of form like a little community on. So rather than getting just focused on like what's our ranking for this individual keyword, it was really like, let's create a comprehensive content strategy that maps to the entire product. And that's taken a while to get out the door. But by doing that and then letting brand marketing do its thing versus like us, I don't know, going out to random websites that are adjacently related to their industry and be like, hey, can you please link to our great blog post? That's just like, in my opinion, that's not really how the internet operates anymore. You can get a few backlinks, sure, but like if that's your moat, like going out and getting like five links from another website, that's not much of a moat. Like you want thousands, and you want a brand that's going to generate thousands of links from reputable websites in your industry that their buyers read and trust. And that's usually not the work of an SEO agency. You can have some pieces of content that perform very well and do that. But I find that and you can get the ball rolling through like some tactical backlinks or whatever. But I find that like brand is the biggest growth driver when it comes to SEO, and that sites that are not brands that are just like hardcore executing on SEO tactics, they don't stand a chance against like a real brand that has like a go-to-market motion that includes SEO dialed in.
Mm, yeah. Do you think there's like, so in that, like the screenshot you posted with just lists like, up and to the right, the organic search traffic just going, crazy in the best way possible. Do you think there's any other factors that may be at play here that like could be getting lost in attribution, like awareness or demand generation, or how do you kind of like, credit that surge in traffic to exactly what your team is doing?
So I'd say good question. Part of it is like stagnation and traffic growth over time before working with us. So it's just very clear to see like this is when we started, this is what we're doing. And it's the actual articles that we work on together that are growing, or the product pages that we work on together that are growing.
Right.
Um, but when it comes to like attribution, specifically pipeline attribution, using something like a Ramp Metrics or HubSpot Enterprise, that's really helpful. I'm not a big fan of Google Analytics for actually understanding like the value you provide. I think it's useful for like pure web analytics, understanding like usage and what page get views. But my first ever in-house job, I was at WP Engine, and I remember like seeing all these form fills for the enterprise WordPress hosting page and being like, oh man, we're doing like so many leads, it's gonna be great. And then I went and looked at them, and it was just like bots, random form fills, people that were totally unqualified. And I was originally agency side, where we didn't really do that kind of digging into the CRM. We were just like, oh, numbers going up, we're doing great. And then actually seeing like, oh, the quality of these leads really matters, because a lot of them are hot garbage, or the ones that are good, sometimes they don't even show up to the call. So it's like, what are we getting all excited about? So tying those efforts to the CRM, which I know Outshine is very good at, that's core to understanding your value. Like I don't really care about like clicks or lots of web traffic if it doesn't align to more revenue coming in. So getting outside of like the standard SEO tools and using things that can actually attach to CRM records, that's really what we try and push for.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. That's the best possible way to measure true success, right? When it comes to SEO and SEM, the latter kind of takes effect like immediately, as opposed to SEO's, slow, more methodical gains, I guess. How do you think about SEM in relation to what you do for your clients?
I think of it as a proving ground. And it's very rare that we'll be like, oh, we have all these learnings that the SEM team just doesn't know about. Like although they operate in the same like web interface, they're both in search, they're very, very different channels that require different skill sets and oftentimes can be leveraged in different ways. I'm thinking of one company that we work with in particular where the paid search team was able to drive quite a bit of pipeline off this one keyword. But when we looked at it, I was like, okay, I get that. But everything that's ranking is like a top of funnel informational article. And we're not gonna be able to just to like stick up a demo lander and say, like, hey, get our product. Like that's not what the organic results want. And it's because with paid search, you can kind of do whatever you want. And if you get click through and it helps people meet their need, you're gonna continue to rank. You're gonna have a high, or I shouldn't say rank, you're gonna continue to get impressions, you're gonna have a high quality score if you're gonna get a lot of click through. So it's like a pretty different beast. But what we like to do is when we do put together a content strategy, we pull all of the paid search data and figure out like what's converted in the past. And we roll that into sort of a priority metric. And we try and take the learnings from paid search and attach them to SEO. I'd say a lot of companies we work with try and push for like stronger collaboration among paid search and SEO, but the time scales are really different. Like SEM can kind of
Right.
turn and test on a moment's notice, whereas SEO, it's like if we change strategy, then it's going to take 3 months essentially to like really start seeing the returns if we start on something totally net new that we don't have a lot of coverage for already. So while I like taking learnings from paid search, I don't always think the two have like this true partnership. I think paid search is sort of the proving grounds, a great place for discovery, and ultimately is like often much more effective at generating revenue than like at a gross profit level than SEO is. Just like it gets quite a bit of click through. You can put people right into a demo lander. But I think there's a lot that SEO can learn from paid search. I think every now and then SEO can toss some learnings over to the paid search team, but it's not as common as I think the general consensus is that like the two should have this like extremely close partnership.
Right. Yeah. And I was going to say, like, do you think there's any merit in trying to break down that silo between, or break down the two silos between, SEO and SEM? But maybe it's best that that silo kind of almost stays up.
Think it's like I like breaking down like the data silo, but again, it's like such a different movement that it's tough to like I can't respond to things or my team can't respond to things as quickly as paid search can throw it at us. So it's more like I'd rather do like a monthly sync or like a quarterly sync even to figure out, okay, like what's working for you and what's changed quarter over quarter. What trends are you seeing? What's no longer working that used to work? And then we can adjust to that over time. But I mean, SEM is like a speedboat that can turn on a dime, and we're closer to like a barge that needs a lot of effort to turn. So,
Right.
and a lot of time. So I think it's just like love that data, love that collaboration, but it's not this like fast feedback loop. It's more almost uh I don't have a good analogy for it, but it's like SEM can send us data really quickly, but we can only react so quickly.
Yeah.
So, and then the learnings that we send, they can get those out themselves in a day. So it's just it's very and again, it's like there's always this like holy grail of like, oh, we got to get paid search and SEO collaborating perfectly. And then we get asked questions like, oh, if we're ranking really well for this term, can we pull back on paid spend? It's like absolutely not. No, don't. No, be everywhere. So I am, and unless the term's not working, but I find that like I'll probably get slaughtered for this on the LinkedIn comments, but I find that like this idea of like a true partnership is a little bit of hype, and the data can be used to benefit the other channel, but I don't ever see those teams working side by side and at the same pace and getting this like 10x value from that partnership.
No, that's fair. It's kind of like sales and marketing, like how there's learnings to be had between both of those two departments. And oftentimes people are saying like, oh, let's have weekly syncs or daily syncs and exchange learnings. But like, to what extent, right? Like there are things to be gained between those two departments, and then to have the cross pollination between those two opened up. But um, I think there is diminishing returns if you're having like weekly and daily syncs between each other. Like I think those two departments are also very different. So I think just like SEO and SEM, yes, it's good to open up the communication, but to have a barrier to that too.
Mm-hmm.
Um, do you find like in today's world, I guess in the B2B SaaS world, with like rising competition, there's rising acquisition costs, changes to search engine algorithms. Do you think it's getting increasingly more difficult to get direct value out of SEO for your clients?
I think it's a matter of how critical your solution is. And I think in 2021, there was a lot of solutions that could be sold that maybe weren't mission critical, but were nice to have. And I think that budget is no longer there. We're still seeing traffic, but I think there's been a macroeconomic shift that things that are not mission critical, things that are not an absolute need, whether it's like a compliance factor or security factor. It's just like a thing that you liked and did its job, but it wasn't what you needed to do your day to day. It was just an add on. I think that's much harder to provide value for. So, for companies that are producing things that are in need, not just in need, but truly needed, and you cannot operate without them, search still works great. And I think like everything's always getting more competitive over time. Like when I got started in SEO almost 15 years ago, or maybe it was 15 years ago now, it was very easy. It was almost like a scam or like a game. Like it was ridiculous how quickly you could rank for a term if you put your mind to it. Now it's really a place where like brands win and brands already have that trust. So that's why we primarily try and work with like later stage companies that have that brand already built out, or we're just layering on performance marketing on top of it. I think what is no longer as effective is these like no name, like there is not much of a brand. The website is poorly designed and it's just like a lander asking for demos. Like I think that is not going to work as well. Like truly it's about people having like when people were searching for solutions online, like the internet was this like mysterious place filled with like opportunity. And now people are like, no, like I get the online world. My online and offline world are pretty much synonymous. I'm constantly online. I know the brands that are out there. I've been doing this for a while. So I want to go with a brand I trust versus like, hey, this keyword matched exactly to what I was looking for. So I'm going to sign up for this thing. Like if HubSpot's, 3 positions down below, I'm probably going to click on that because I know HubSpot and I know it's going to integrate with all my systems already versus this like fly by night startup, very little funding, 10-person team, could shut down overnight. Like I think there's just more risk in like running a startup, getting funding is harder than ever. So I think people are going to probably go towards like incumbents and bundling versus like new startups and unbundling systems that were previously like platform specific. So I think we're just seeing a shift back to like incumbents and all-in-ones versus like let me build a Frankenstack of 50 different tools that like man we need another solution so they can all talk to each other.
Yeah, yeah, that makes total sense. I think this ties nicely, I think, into I think you said this in a podcast, or maybe it was just something you posted on your Twitter. I forget at this 10 seconds, but you did mention that the growth plays offering is like to still focus on search, but instead of relying on it so much for distribution, leveraging it to kind of build this first party audience so that accounts can go direct. Can you talk me through that, like that piece of the growth plays playbook a little bit and how you kind of apply that strategy?
Yeah, thank you. Wow, you went deep on the feed. I just think even 5 years ago, it was like we're gonna spin up all these pages, we're gonna get these visits from people that across their entire customer journey, they're gonna hit our website like 10 times, 15 times, and they're gonna opt into a demo, or maybe it's only 5 times, but still it's like we could count on if we're gonna produce this content, we're gonna rank for these keywords, we're gonna get this traffic will convert. And I think search is quickly changing. OpenAI just announced like they're creating a search interface. Perplexity's out there, and we see that like there's starting to be some traffic from these things. But if you use those interfaces, they don't necessarily like, send a lot of traffic out. They try and answer the question fully, and it's like okay, if you want more, you can like go over there. But I think most people just want their questions answered. So, and I imagine that Google will eventually go in this way as well. So this idea that like Google's just going to be sending massive amounts of traffic for always and forever, I think is a bet that I don't want to make. And rather than hoping that a potential account is going to touch the website 10, 20 times, I'd rather grab that contact information then and then move to email, which is something that like no algorithm can take away from you. So I think like there's always this idea of like platform risk. Like Google can change overnight or Facebook can change overnight. And I think a really great example of that is Upworthy or any of those like inspirational Facebook brands from yesteryear that or not yesteryear, a while back that like garnered all this traffic, similar to like a BuzzFeed, where it was like, oh, like this puppy got lost and then it found its owner, and then it drove tons of traffic to Upworthy. Those things got killed overnight because there was a platform shift. And so being reliant on these like algorithms and these intermediaries to connect with your audience, I think is really risky. So getting people into SEO content and then getting them into a newsletter or some type of like content series. Like I love the idea of like an interview series or a content series that keeps people engaged where they can learn that doesn't necessarily tie to SEO keywords. Like SEO keywords are somewhat commodities. They're very common. That's why we want to go after them because they're being searched for a ton. But you can take an interview in a way that like people didn't even know how to articulate that question that's being answered. So instead of just being in this mode of like let me find people where they are, you can actually help like elevate people, bring them new ideas, bring them new concepts, and get them thinking in new ways about problems they didn't even know existed versus relying on the problems that they know they have and can already articulate. So I think like there's some limit, like search is still like by far the biggest traffic driver out of any like if you look at in any analytics accounts, like usually direct and organic are somewhat tied, and then it goes down from there. Certain businesses are outliers, but for the most part in B2B, that's where it is, especially for established sites. But this idea that it's always going to be that way is just not something I want to bet on. So I'd rather like start finding people who are really engaged, really interested, and showing them things that don't necessarily attach to a keyword. What someone much smarter than I penned is like barbecue content. Like if you just had like a bunch of really legit practitioners around at a barbecue, like what are they talking about? I bet it's not a super high traffic keyword and defining what it is and its benefits. They're getting really into the weeds. And that's what I think you can do with like a first party audience versus being relying on algorithmic distribution. Same for LinkedIn. Like you need engagement, you need to have these certain things that are going to get more distribution on those platforms. And by having a first party audience that you can send things to directly, that's where you can really break free of like the algorithmic constraints and just communicate authentically with your audience. So big fan of like this whole concept of leveraging these channels for first party audience development.
Amazing. What's your barbecue content?
My barbecue content. I personally, and this kind of ties into it. I think parasocial relationships are a big driver of growth. And it's tough to do because you're putting a lot of your eggs into like the baskets of creators that work for you. But I love like learning from best in class people. Like when I think about like the content I tune into, it's often me trying to learn from people who are best in class in the industry. So I think like interview series like we're doing right now, that's a great example of like where we can talk about things that people wouldn't know how to search for, or getting like postmortems or breakdowns of big events, like things that I like stratechery or I don't know how to pronounce it, but like that's a great newsletter.
Yeah.
Or like Pragmatic Engineer. A lot of the stuff I read on Substack. Like I think, although I'd say like Substack is a platform and that isn't really actually going direct, but I think like that's more where I'm getting more interesting things. Whereas like search has really shifted to being referential and me like finding information that I know that I need, or like a process or a template or a tool that I know I need to use or want to use, versus like, 15 years ago, there's a lot of search for like cute cat pictures, but that's all moved to feeds and social. So I think search, as the internet's gotten more fragmented, we spend less time on search and more time on like social media channels. Some of the use cases for search have shifted to social media. And that's why I think search is really becoming a place for like referential fact-based content, or looking at like processes or tutorials versus inspiration or a place to like discover new ideas.
Mm. Yeah, it's so interesting to kind of conceptualize the internet as this like place where like now we go to different places for different specific use cases, right? Um, I think you said like 15 years ago when you started in SEO, things were just a lot simpler, obviously a lot easier to rank. I'm not going to try to make you, forecast 15 years into the future because that's insane. But even like maybe 5 years down the road, where do you see, SEO management?
Um, I'd say that's hard for me to predict. And I think Google also doesn't know where it's going to be. And it
Yeah.
may not be with Google, but I do think there's going to be more fragmentation in search. Like we're already seeing that with like Perplexity and potentially this like Chat GPT search engine. So I think like perhaps Google could lose some market share, and it won't be about just optimizing for Google anymore. We have actually seen some customers that like get a lot of Bing traffic in like some pretty regulated spaces, which is interesting because I think it's like they use Microsoft computers and are in they're using like a Microsoft browser. But I think potentially interfaces could become more conversational and search could become more threaded versus being like restarting the search, like sort of how ChatGPT you can add on to it over time. Although I
Right.
don't expect ChatGPT to be like the incumbent in the space. Like I think we're in the Friendster area of like these AI interfaces, and I think ChatGPT could very much become like a secondary contributor. But I do think that it's going to be more multimodal. So more video, more imagery, less like 10 blue links. But there's still like image packs and video packs and search, but I think things are going to be more um less like chunked out. So it's going to be just uh different media formats not being treated as like an individual pack or like some outlier result, but just mixed into everything else. Because I think the internet used to be very text based. That's primarily the method it was, but now like way more video based, especially on social feeds. So, and I think Google does an okay job of marketing video, primarily YouTube content, but I think we're going to see um, that being more like as the internet becomes more video native, search will become more video native as well. But I think the biggest change will probably be like a move to a conversational interface that remembers what you've said and remembers how you search and knows what you like and knows what you buy versus every search being like a net new starting point.
You mentioned AI a couple times throughout this conversation, so I'd be remiss not to touch on it. Do you think like what type of impact do you think AI and SGE and everything else is going to have on your clients? Is this something that we should be, preparing for, or is this a flash in the pan?
Oh, really making me bust it out with the predictions. I'll say this, we've seen some efficiency gains from AI inside the company. We use it pretty effectively for certain tasks. I think the promise of what AI will do is bigger than what it can fulfill on today. And I think we're going to see some real issues with trying to operationalize it. Because I think a lot of people still don't have exposure to it. And when I use it for, there's this, going to pause real quick so I get this right. So when people talk about the promises of AI, I think of this concept that I believe Michael Crichton penned, like the gentleman amnesia effect. And it's this idea of like you're reading a newspaper about a topic you really know, and then you read it and you're like, well, that's not right at all. Like this is totally off. And then you go back and read another article in the newspaper and you're like, oh, this is great fact-based information. And I think like when I try and pull insights or ideas that I deeply know about out of these AI interfaces, it's pretty vanilla. It's pretty like standard general information. It's not that helpful. It doesn't go that deep. But when I go into topics I don't know that well, I'm like, oh, this is fantastic. This saved me so much time. So I think we're going to find that it's like the models today are like pretty general, somewhat like non-expert content, sort of just a mishmash of like general ideas. I do think, there could be some breakthroughs with foundational models that lead to very different outcomes, and much like stronger use cases and much larger adoption. But I view it more as like an assistant today than something that can replace any individual worker.
I like it. Makes sense. So we'll still have our jobs.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so for you and me both.